Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shakespeare and Company. It's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight. Why do we remember the past and not the future? Do we exist in time, or does time exist in us? What does it really mean to say that time passes? What ties time to our nature as persons, to our subjectivity? What am I listening to when I listen to the passing of time? Professor Carlo Rovelli asks all of these questions in the preface to his latest book, The Order of Time, and then takes readers on a journey that doesn't just seek to address them, but to churn up the apparently firm foundations from which they were posed. It's often dizzying, frequently unsettling, and yet The Order of Time is also a transcendent reading experience. Professor Rovelli takes deeply complex, often counterintuitive scientific ideas, theories from Clausius, Boltzmann and Einstein, concepts of quantum gravity and indeterminacy, and renders them understandable to, well, let's be frank, to someone like me. To pull all this off, he calls upon his extensive literary gifts, his profoundly subtle and supple mind, but also on the words of Shakespeare, of Rilke, and even the Grateful Dead. The result is a book that is as philosophical as it is scientific, as much in awe of the nuances of abstract theories as it is of the beauty of humanistic thought. Carlo Rovelli is a theoretical physicist who has made significant contributions to the physics of space and time. He's worked in Italy and the US and is currently directing the quantum gravity research group of the Centre de Physique Théorique in Marseille. His books, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics and Reality is Not What It Seems, are international bestsellers that have been translated into 41 languages. The Guardian called The Order of Time a joy to read, adding, "Rovelli writes easily, vividly and brilliantly." In a testament to his interdisciplinary appeal, Philip Pullman said, "Carlo Rovelli manages to convey the mystery of very large things and very small things with brilliant effect," while The New Scientist finished its glowing review by simply declaring, "More of this, please." More indeed. Please join me in welcoming Carlo Rovelli to Shakespeare and Company.
Thank you very much for this exaggerated, undeserved introduction.
Or indeed, I should have said welcome back to Shakespeare and Company, because
yes.
Of course it was a year ago or two?
A year ago,
I think
maybe
so,
more,
yeah.
maybe more.
When we discussed reality is not what it seems. Right. I think I'd like to begin with talking about the notion of time itself, and begin with how we experience it, because of course time, first and foremost, from our perspective, is something you talk about us inhabiting time, as kind of living it as fish live in water, and yet curiously from a scientific perspective it's something which has been very difficult for us to pin down. I was wondering, could you just talk a little bit about the reasons for this?
Yes. Well, first, let me say thank you very much for being here. I was here before, and it's such a joy being this place. This place is completely magic, and the possibility of staying. I'm actually spending 2 days here, living upstairs, and it's absolutely wonderful. You couldn't be in a better place in Paris. Well, time. The point is that time for us, it's a very complex thing with a lot of sides, a lot of aspects, some very obvious to us, and some very important to us. And in fact, it's even more than that. We couldn't even think about ourselves without time. And first of all, we slide through time, right? We go from the past to the present to the future. So we have this idea: time is a long line. This line, and this line is like a thread, this long thread. We are here, and then we are here. At the end of this conversation, we'll be here. That's tomorrow. That's yesterday. It passes. The future is completely different from the present. Now we're in the present. We are in the present. In London is the same present. In New York is the same present. And all over the universe is the same present. It's measured by clock. Watches, and all the watches go at the same speed, so we can uniquely characterize every moment with and so on and so forth. But almost everything I said is wrong. It's wrong in the sense that not is wrong for us. It's wrong in the sense it's an approximation of a much more complex structure of time which is in the world. But let me add immediately one thing. Time for us is more than this. It's not just the clock time that passes and we use to organize the life. Time for us is it's something which has a strong emotional aspect. Time is what is sliding away. We don't have time. Is our memories, our the memory of our joys, our sorrows, and this desire of something that may arrive but may not arrive. So our entire emotional life is attached to this sliding time. So that's why it's so complicated to disentangle it, because it's all sort of layers, of different layers.
And yet it's interesting, there's something quite, I think, contradictory about the way we think of it, because you mentioned clock time, and I think that would be broadly the way most of us would think of time. We think, okay, it's more or less the same for everybody, and yet in our experiences, even from personal experience, we know this isn't the case. It's sort of, if you're, I mean, there's a famous thing from Roland Barthes when he talks about the time when somebody says, "I'll call you," waiting for the phone call feels much longer than the person who is waiting to make the phone call.
I remember my when I was in high school, the girls would always say, "I'll call you, Carlo," and then
and in a similar vein, at a moment you say, it only takes a few micrograms of LSD to completely change the way we experience time, and yet at the same time, I was going to say, we tend to think of it as something like quite sort of strictly regulated by clocks.
Yeah, in fact, writing the book, I stumbled upon that because in writing the book, I was sort of writing, look, in physics we learn that time is flexible. I mean, clocks go at different speed depending on where you are. We know today that it's possible that people age at different rate. So there's this movie where the hero comes back from an interstellar trip and meets his daughter, who has become older than him. And we know that this is possible. That's not Hollywood fantasy, it's just reality. And it's surprising. And so in writing the book, I was saying, look, I mean, we all know that time goes at the same speed for everybody, and it's not true. But then I said, wait a minute, we all know that time goes the same speed for everybody. How do we actually know it? Because our experience, time does not, there's nothing regular in time, right? Time is sometimes passes fast, sometimes passes slowly. So the idea of regular time not only is wrong physically, but is also approximately true for physics. Clock time is approximately common, but it's also not very much what we call time. What we call time is a different experience. And historically, it's a recent idea. It's not an old idea. Because essentially because our life is very much regulated by what time is it, by clock time. But this is recent. I mean, clocks were rare a few centuries ago. Clock became more common at the end of the Middle Ages, when there were churches built and towers and the clock tower. But up to that point, the time was basically day, night, day, night, day, night. And even the division of the day in 24 hours is ancient. It's sort of 2,000-3,000, maybe 4,000 years old. Mesopotamia come from there. But the division was 12 hours between sunrise and sunset, which means that summer 1 hour is longer than in winter. Right, so for many centuries, 1 hour is a 12th part of the time between sun. So the hour was a flexible thing, and even what time is it now? We're used to time zones, but so Paris and Marseille have the same time, but this is end of 19th century, because up to that point, basically every town, every little town has its own clock, and which was regulated to 12 o'clock midday. But midday in Paris is not midday. So when the sun is at the zenith in Paris, is not so in Bordeaux. because it takes some time. So Bordeaux was always 15 minutes after Paris, right?
And indeed, in certain places in Paris, there's one thing you talk about in the book with the train station.
The train station kept the time 5 minutes later, so for a kind of kindness to the to the travelers who were running late, and they were giving them 5 minutes. And this changed only with basically with trains. And with the telegraph, but the important thing was the train, because of course if you want to make a timetable, and the trains at the end of the 19th century started to be pretty precise and have it's not easy to have a timetable if every station in the country has a different clock time, right? This becomes a nightmare. So it started this this idea that we should all agree on some time, and the Americans proposed to have a single time for all the planet. So it's 3 o'clock all over the planet, it's 4 o'clock. So 3 o'clock would be, say, accorded to, I don't know, London. So midday is at 12 o'clock in London, it's 6 p.m. in 6 a.m. in New York, depending where you are. But people dislike that, obviously, because you're used to the fact that you wake up at 8 o'clock and not 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So there was a huge debate, and then there was this compromise, which was to divide the Earth in time zones, which is a sort of in between, right? So it's in between using the sun for 12 o'clock and but doing it on a larger patches. And within a time zone, the problem now was to put all the clocks together. So there was this problem of regulating the clocks, which is not easy, because if you start to regulate this with this with this, when you make the tour, you're off by. So you have to find a good way. So there were all these strategies for synchronizing clocks, and there was a guy in Switzerland who was in a patent office who was evaluating patents for synchronizing clocks, and his name was Albert Einstein, and and he was obviously this had an effect on him, because in the moment in which humanity decided to synchronize clock, somebody, Einstein, realized that this is impossible, because clock actually go at different speed.
Which brings me on very nicely, actually, to my next question, which was, because, of course, all the things we talked about so far, these different experience of time, the sort of, let's say, the social history of how we experience time, is something I think, everyone here could quite easily identify with from their personal experience. What you bring, of course, to writing about time is an entire career dedicated, at least in part, to investigating the scientific
time in science, time in physics.
And I was just wondering, talking about the book itself, when you decided to write this book dealing with time, was it quite a scary prospect, the idea of sort of bringing these two vastly different ways of looking at time together, and then presenting them in a way that readers could hopefully understand?
The scary part was to talk about a problem which is still open, on which I spent a lot of time, and which have so many sides in it, and to do it for real somehow. I had published before the 7 lessons of physics, which were read a lot, and which were in a sense simpler. And a lot of people wanted to listen more. And then I said, well, what should I do next? And I did not want to repeat a sort of formula that worked. I wanted to, if people want to listen, I'm going to give the core of what has fascinated me in science, in physics. And time has been the center of the fascination of my life. It's an incredible subject. First, because we have discovered so much. Time really works different than our everyday experience. So that's one part of the story. Look, time is not what you thought it is. In some precise sense, there's no time at the fundamental level. And third, because we really don't understand so many things still about time. So there's still this mysterious aspect of it. And so, telling the full story, I said, I told myself I want to do it for real. So tell everything I do understand about time, and not hide anything we don't understand about time.
And indeed, you do that as the book progresses. We get the moments where you say, this is what we broadly understand, what is broadly uncontroversial.
Right.
And then there's a moment where you say, now some of the things I'm going to present from this moment on, it's less sure. It's what my study, what my instinct tells me. The structure of the book I find interesting, and we were talking just a little bit about this before, because it's essentially a classical kind of 3-act structure in a way. The kind of if time is the hero of your book, you kind of take time on the sort of the hero's journey, where at the beginning you sort of time departs. I mean, anything you think you know about time is wrong. Then we have this kind of descent into an abyss, or there's a moment you describe it as an empty, windswept landscape, where once all your preconceptions have been taken away, how are you supposed to deal with it? And then in part 3, it's kind of the return to the hearth, when you return to the sort of the human experience, and you and you help us perhaps digest everything we've learned and figure out how that might relate to our experience. And I'm just curious about that structure. Was that a journey that you felt that you had gone on yourself, and when, for example, you first started studying time?
Yes, it's partially that. It partially reflects my own path about time, because there was a part in which I studied at school essentially, and I discovered that clocks go at different speed, that there's no present in the universe, and then it was more and more, and then there was all my research about quantum gravity without time. In which, as you say, we go farther and farther away into the wilderness, into the high mountain, the deep hell infras. But then the question is, all right, so there's no time in the world, in the fundamental structure of the world. What is time for us then? What is this thing that we experience for us time? And so then there was this coming back to us. So it's a going and back, and you're right. In part, it was the way the book was also designed and conceived, but it's also the quintessential narration since Gilgamesh, I guess. Right? It's just, it goes and comes back.
And indeed, in let's say the first part of the book, the first act of the book, in a sense, it's that sort of that quest for knowledge, which you compare to children growing up, and discovering that the world is not exactly how it is within the four walls of which they grew up, and sort of we have been as a species, we've been going through the same process from perhaps the Greek scientist who gives us the title of the book. Anaximander was perhaps one of the first, at least we have on record, of a sort of scientist in the traditional sense.
Yeah, I think that science is largely that. It's a collective way of learning, in the same way in which we learn when we grow up from childhood to, we just learn more things. I mean, we first think there's only Paris, and we realize there's the rest of France, and then we realize that the world is not just France, it's Europe, and then we realize, it's not Europe, actually it's more than that, and so on and so forth. And then we start looking out, and so we look in the small, we keep learning things. Perhaps not as a species, but because this is a specific huge growth of knowledge that came with what we call civilization, namely with a strong capacity of accumulating knowledge. Right? So science is strongly cumulative, in spite of modern philosophy of science saying not so much, but it is cumulative. We learn. I mean, the Earth is round. We have learned it's forever. The Earth moves. We'll learn it forever. Things are done made by atoms. We'll learn. Clocks don't go different speed. We've learned it forever. So we keep learning things. We're surprised, but just it's not a surprise. In a sense, the surprise is not how is the world. The surprise is look how blind we were of not seeing how things were. Right? If in the distance before Anaximander, people thought that the sky is up and the sun is up and down there's just Earth. then you realize, oh, wait a minute, the sky is all around us. The sun is sky can go all around us. So the discovery is always to discover that our perspective was partial, and we learn, and that's the first part. But the book is not just about science, as you were saying at the beginning. It's a lot about, and I think science is under attack today by many sides, and I think it's a problem. It's a danger for society because it's bad. We're going to lose one of our best tools. But partially is also, of course, science itself has faults in that. One of the faults is in the strong desire of being objective. Science tend to distantiate itself from being human, in a sense. While what we need is not just learning objectively the thing. We need a comprehensive structure in where our scientific knowledge, our human emotions, our sense of why we live stay together in a story, in a narration, in an ensemble, which may evolve, may change, but has to integrate. That's somehow what I try to do in the book.
And do you think part of the reason that science is under attack today is because of the sort of the incredible and sort of dizzying advances since Einstein, in a way that sort of when there was, for example, the Copernican revolution, with science attacked when something is almost too difficult for people to accept, too disorienting, the sort of the natural response, if you like, is to attack it and try and shut it down and to try and preserve the world order. Like, is there something too unsettling about these concepts of, for example, the non-existence of time, of the flow of time, for example, that, do you think, kind of provokes a sort of a defensive reaction?
No, I don't
people?
think this that the reason science is under attack, because people who attack science don't even bother about this.
Okay.
I mean, the people who care about the wonders that come. Once you start looking into the wonders that we discover about the world, you're just fascinated by it because it's beautiful, it's strange, it's magic. Because it's like opening your eyes. It's not. Then it's hard to be against it. It's like, somebody opens the window and you say, I'm against it. No, you're not against it. You might. It's at the window. It's outside there. There's a sea, there's eagles, everything. There's. The science is under attack for completely different reasons, I think, right now, which have to do with the fact that we humans keep fighting with one another and prefer not to listen to good reasons sometimes. But science is also under attack because of the atomic bomb, because the modern world, which is largely due to science, has come with a lot of great things, but also with a lot of problems. So people react to these problems for more concrete reasons, I would say.
And I think that's one of the things the book does very successfully, in your writing generally, actually, is this to convey a sense of the awe and the wonder that you feel in practicing your work. Because you spoke a moment ago about the maybe this kind of the distance of science and the kind of perceived coldness of science. And if that is the impression people have, maybe for that reason they find it easier to attack it, or at least easier not to defend science. Whereas when reading The Order of Time, just getting a sense of as I say, the absolute wonder that you feel in discovering these things about the universe and figuring out how we can experience something in this way and not in another way is perhaps the first line of defense. Because if more people can feel that and more people can identify with that, perhaps people will be more likely to rally to science's defense.
Yeah, I fell in love with physics at some point in my life. Late. It happened late, but it definitely was a moment in, wow, this is great. This is fantastic. There's so much to learn, and it's so beautiful to discover that the world is not as simple as we thought. It's richer. It's more beautiful, has more sides. And so I started also late to write, but my writing is a lot recounting this love story with science. I mean, my emotions with science.
For example, in addition to the posters of rock bands that you had on your wall when you were studying, you also had a bed sheet with was it 10 to the minus 33, which for the uninitiated, perhaps you could.
It made no sense at all. Yeah, because I mean, this is that's a typical case. That's how, when I really got in love with what I've been doing the rest of my life, in fact. So you discover that the things are made by atoms, right? This sort of calm water is all these zillions of small zigzagging atoms, and that's fantastic. That's wonderful. That was discovered by, Boltzmann and all the people in the end of 19th century. But then at a much smaller scale, much smaller, space itself has a sort of atomic structure, which we haven't figured out yet. And that's what I discovered when I was 24, 25. I was in my university years. So we actually don't know what is space, what is the structure of space, and the structure of time that comes with it. So it was fantastic. There's an open problem there, which has to do with a very minimal structure of reality, and it's up there to grab. I mean, it's not going to be me, but me and my friends all together, we can do it. So I decided that I wanted to do that, and the scale at which this happened, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, which is 1 billionth of a billions of a billions of a billion, something like that, of a centimeters. So I took this big piece of thing, I wrote 10 to the minus 33 in red, and I posted it on the wall, and I said, that's where I want to go.
Now, I would like to, we're not going to be able to do the science justice in the time we have to talk about it tonight, but I would just like to, I don't want to say gloss over, because I know there are people here who would be interested just to hear about the sort of at least the process that we go through. So in the first part of the book, you've already said that we discover things like time moves differently. Time goes at different speeds depending on the height you are. Also, so that's
the first big surprise.
Yeah, and you'd also talk about the loss of direction.
Right, that's the second huge surprise. So in the equation that govern the world, so in the working of the world, there's no difference between the past and the future. So this opened a question: why is the past so different than the future? You said at the beginning, why do we remember the past and we don't remember the future? And it's a beautiful question. It's a fantastic question to which we don't yet have a totally convincing answer. We understand a lot about that. We understand that depend on entropy, depend on the blurring, depend on past law entropy, but it's not over yet. So that's the second thing. There's no distinction between past and future in the working of the third discovery. It's probably the most hallucinogenic, and that's again something we know very well. It's fully established, but it's not yet digested, I would say, and is the fact that the notion of now, present, does not make sense at a large distance from us. Now is only local. So you and I are in the same now here only because you look at me, I look at you, and the time that light takes to go from you to me and me to you is so small. It's a nanosecond, fraction of a nanosecond, that we can discard it. So I see you in the present because a nanosecond is nothing. But if I want to be precise, I don't see you in the present, right? I see you how you were a nanosecond ago, and you see me how you were a nanosecond ago when you see me. So we are never together. We're always in and if you're close, it doesn't matter. But if you were on Saturn, I would see you 2 hours ago and you would see me 2 hours ago. And then if I ask the question, what are you doing right now? This right now, if you sit down and try to make it precise, there's no way to make it precise. There is no sense in which there is a now for faraway things. The now is a notion that comes from this disregarding the light, the time it takes light to travel. So if we with our brain we resolve maybe a tenth of a second, or say a hundredth of a second. Hundredth of a second, light goes to larger than the Earth. So we can think that the Earth as a whole, within this precision, is in a single now. But not the Moon, not Mars, and even much less a faraway galaxy. Light takes millions of years to go a faraway galaxy. So now is here. There's no common now in the universe. And this is very strong, right? Because we are told that reality exists now, and what exists now, and past doesn't exist anymore. So what does it mean to exist if now is broken in this way?
And indeed, this you talked about the sort of the imprecision of the way we experience things, and you mentioned the blurring, which is going to become an important concept in not just the way we experience time, but why we experience time. How we do.
Yeah, it's in the book. The notion of blurring, it takes more and more importance as going away. It's crucial. Was crucial in the work of Boltzmann. Was crucial in the work of the guys who have understood thermodynamics. What it means something to be hot. What it means. Why there's this irreversibility. Temperature, heat. These are all understood in terms of blurring. But one thing I try to do in the book is go ahead with respect to this question: why is the past different from the future? And the more and more I suggest it's a perspectival thing. So it depends on the way we see the world in an imprecise way. It depends on us, not just as the world by itself.
So in a sense, sort of time. This idea of the flow of time is more to do with our imprecise tools of perceiving the sense data. Exactly.
Yeah. So the sense of the flow of time is not in the things themselves, in the grammar things. It has to do with the way we as pieces of nature interact with the rest. And in fact, this sense of flowing that we have, it has a lot to do with the fact that our brain works in a certain manner. We have memories of the past, we keep calculating the future. So when we think about time, we are not really thinking about how things correlated to the position of a watch. We are thinking about what is in our brain as memories and anticipation. So that's why time is multi-layered. It goes from thermodynamic to relativity to quantum mechanics, but then it goes to the structure of the brain and to our emotional reaction to that.
And that was something which in a way that it gives you that sense as a reader, as you're sort of grappling with these very unusual concepts. In a way that gives you a sense of sort of reconciliation, in as much as when we're on that windswept tundra where everything we think we know is we've been told is not the case. There is this sense of, well, okay, so my experience of the universe is therefore inherently false. What can I rely on? And that's not actually what you're saying.
That's not at all what you're saying. And in fact, the book is in that sense is going in a desolated land, maybe beautiful but so non-human, and then back to us, because the universe we inhabit is our universe. Our look at the universe is not false. Is our perspective on it. But in the universe, there are the things that make us. So the time that make us is one aspect of the universe. Maybe it's not the fundamental grammar of thing, but it's not an illusion either. It's our. It's like Copernicus, right? I mean, it's just we try to understand why the sun and the star rotate around us. And then we discover that they don't rotate. It's us that rotate. We're on this spinning rock, so we see it. But this doesn't make it false. It's just we understand what it means. And then globally, we find the full story, and we recognize where we are in this full story, and our perception is the correct perception from our perspective.
In the same way that as a sort of a civilization, we have we can look out to the horizon and we can see it as broadly flat, but we have digested most of us have digested the idea that we live on a spherical planet. Do you think some of the things we're discovering about time in generations, in centuries, will be equally digested?
Yeah, I think so.
You don't think there's anything sort of almost too counterintuitive for us to?
No. I think we need more clarity. We need more. But if humanity survives, if we don't kill one another with atomic bombs, and if things go well, think about the movie I mentioned. When some of us will be traveling and coming back young. Many years later, our sense of time will be completely different. Obviously.
Which is just so fascinating, just to think of the impact on...
It will have a strong impact on
the humanity, the way we interact with each other, perhaps our sense of morality, sort of everything could be. Yeah. It just sort of feels like quite an adventure. I've got one final sort of section I'd like to talk with you a little bit about. Then I think we'll have a short reading, and then I'll open it up to the audience. But we've touched on it a little bit. But I think it can't be emphasized enough how inherent to your work the arts are, the arts and the humanities. As I said in the introduction, you reference Shakespeare, Rilke, the Grateful Dead, Strauss. And this isn't just as a way to make us understand. This runs a little bit deeper for you. It's not a case of just sort of, this is a nice analogy for something the Grateful Dead said, but there seems to be this sort of inherent reaction in the...
It is, and it has been so particular with this book on time, because there's many pages on Proust. There are intuitions about what time is for us that come from the arts, which are crucial, which are not neither cosmetic for making the writing more pleasant, nor analogies or things like that. They're really crucial, and I do think that the effort we need to bring science out of its caves is the effort of combining the perspective on reality that come from science, from literature, including from music and from philosophy, and that's not new. I mean, the arts knows that, right? If you read Musil, the beginning of The Man Without Quality, it's all a reflection about how do I make sense of what the scientists have just been telling me. It's just there. Even Proust, there is this thing going on. So we want an integrated view of the world. We don't want a broken view of the world. And if we learn more, of course it looks like it's going everywhere, but then we have to be stronger the effort to integrate.
There's a moment which I found it had quite an impact actually, where you reflected, you say perhaps poetry is another of science's deepest roots, the capacity to see beyond the visible. And there's something, that's I don't know, I can't think of a more poetic way to bring the arts and humanities together. That is the ambition of both. On which note, I think it would be great to hear just a very short reading.
Okay, I'm very much in difficulty because the English thing had been read by Benedict Cumberbatch, so there's no competition here.
Well, no pressure if you...
Okay, so...
and then if you have a question for Carlo, get ready. We'll bring microphones to you afterwards.
I guess I might read the end, okay? Even if it is...
I'm not sure it contains any spoilers. I think it's okay.
No. This is the last sort of pages. And basically what I'm talking about... the last chapter is very personal. I talk about the emotion of time, I talk about death, and I talk about what is rationality, and I get to the point in which I am making the point very strongly that rationality is reason is it's a great thing that humans have. It's a great tools that humans have, but it's just that. It's not what humans are. Humans are much more complex thing that there's the capacity of reasoning. That's why I think that people who say, can computer be like humans? Maybe they will, but not just because they play chess. I mean, it's not because they are so good in doing math that they become similar to us. We're sort of here it is. I'm talking about reason, and the instruments we have found for dealing with our life and attending to it have been many, and reason has revealed itself to be among the best of these. It is precious, but it is only an instrument, a pincer. We use it to handle a substance that is made of fire and ice, something that we have experienced as living and burning emotions. These are the substance of which we are made. They propel us and they drag us back, and we cloak them with fine words. They compel us to act. And something of them always escapes the order of our discourses, since we know that, in the end, every attempt to impose order leaves something outside the frame. And it seems to me that life, this brief life, is nothing other than this, the incessant cry of these emotions that drive us, that we sometimes attempt to channel in the name of a god, a political faith, in a ritual that reassures us that fundamentally everything is in order, in a great and boundless love. And the cry is beautiful. Sometimes it is a cry of pain, sometimes it is a song. And song, as Saint Augustine, observed, I talk about a lot about Augustine talking about time in terms of music. And song, as Augustine observed, is an awareness of time. It is time. It is the hymn of the Vedas that is itself the flowering of time. In the Benedictus of Beethoven Missa Solemnis, the song of the violin is pure beauty, pure desperation, pure joy. We are suspended, holding our breath, feeling mysteriously that this must be the source of meaning, that this is the source of time. Then the song fades and ceases. The silver thread is broken, the gold lantern is shattered, the amphora at the fountain breaks, the bucket falls into the well, the earth returns to dust. And it is fine like this. We can close our eyes, rest. This all seems fair and beautiful to me. This is time.
Thank you so much. Okay, it's over to you. If you have a question for Carlo Rovelli, raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you so everyone can hear, because there are people all over the place. We'll begin with this gentleman here. And I say, please keep your questions brief so that we can get to as many people as possible.
Thank you. I've been struck tonight. You've been talking about the intersection of science and the arts, and you write a lot about that. A columnist in the Financial Times a couple weeks ago was saying that he's on the opposite side. He is on the arts side, and many of his contemporaries expect a scientist to, for example, be conversant with Shakespeare. Yet many of his contemporaries in the arts know nothing about, say, for example, Isaac Newton's 3 laws of motion. And I wonder if this has some impact on some of, you were talking about the issues with science today and technology and why they're not being accepted. Is this a potential problem, that scientists are expected to go one way, but the other side, the arts, is reluctant to come back in the other direction?
Yes, definitely it is, and I fully agree. with this point made, and it's even worse than that, because it's not only that some people, not just in the art of the humanities in general, it's not only that many people don't know are scientifically literate, but there's a sort of pride of being scientifically literate, which, if you think a moment, is horrible. Like, I mean, everybody's entitled to not care about music, about literature, but people sound stupid. Would look stupid if they have pride of the fact that they ignore music, literature, art, philosophy, history. I mean, you think, you sure? I mean, you can be stupid. It's good for you, but don't be proud about that. Partially is our education system, which I think has repeatedly made this mistake in many countries. In France, particularly. Is particularly strong in France, the separation. There's a very good scientific preparation, completely closed into problem solving, math, not even a wide angle scientific perspective. And then there is a very good humanity and education, in which you just, as you said, it's not just you ignore Heisenberg and Dirac, you ignore Newton and Kepler laws. This is, I think it's getting better. I think on both sides there is much more. There are philosophers who say, in some traditions, like, I don't know, Heidegger, despise science, but there's a lot of philosophy today, like in the past, who are very curious and literature in science. So I think the separation is diminishing, I hope.
Okay, that's a question just there.
First of all, thank you for a fantastic presentation. It's wonderful to hear you talk about these things. A little bit reflecting the same sort of notion, because your book seemed to integrate many concepts together in such a nice way, bringing physics against the arts and things. I claim a conflict of interest. I work in neuroscience and mental health now, but I'm very struck by this notion of when I see people who sometimes time is disordered. It's their perceptions. We talked about mind-altering drugs, but there's also the notion that some people with different types of health problems that affect the brain might feel a difference in time going fast, and a lot of what their time perception seems to be about is a combination of events and memories. Some events very personal, some historical, that they can gauge life. And we are now looking at the neuroscience of that, and looking at things like the connectivity in the brain, the neural networks, and how reinforcement of networks produces nodes and memories, etc., or the chemical phenomena. And this is probably a dumb question at the end of a slightly long explanation, but I just wonder, we occasionally dip to the notion that we might learn things from how physics presents this information, but I wonder where the two fields might come together, because there is this enormous, the end of your book is enormous emotional investment in the perception of time. There's no objective truth in a way at the moment, but there's not a global truth. There's a sort of individual experiences as well. Well, first of all, as a neuroscientist, you're sort of in between the sciences, the humanities, right? So you're in the best possible position. Regarding time, I talk a lot about neuroscience in the book, and I talk about the very much or the very little we actually understand about the functioning of the brain, and the work of people like Bonanno, for instance, who was his and other advances in understanding the brain. I think that there is right now a wonderful conversation which is going on. I was at a conference in California a month ago, in which there were some physicists like me and people doing quantum gravity, so fundamental physics, some neuroscientists, some philosopher, and some psychologists, all talking about time. And on the one hand, you say, wait a minute, they're talking about different things. But no, they're talking about the right things, because the actual question is, whose problem is this problem, right? Which part of our knowledge tell us something relevant about that? And I think that a lot of confusion about science, a lot about time, comes from asking the right question to the wrong field, right? There are philosophers which are wrong, in my opinion, who say
Physics is incomplete because it cannot account our sense of passing time, which is a profound mistake because it's not something you have to ask physics, right? Physics is incomplete because it does not account about cats. There are no cats in physics. You can, can read all the books of physics you want. There's never a cat. So is that missing physics? No. Is it cats? Is something else? I mean, you have to ask biologists. You have to ask your sister. You have to ask all sorts of. But there's no incompatibility between cats and physics. Obviously, I mean, it's just one very particular. From a point of view of physics, it's just a very peculiar physical system, which is interesting. So, is something similar about the passing of time? Should we look at it deep into the fundamental equation of the world? There should be a term that breaks the time invariance of the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, whatever, or should we understand it by looking what happened, the concrete way in which the brain works in a physical setting and make up something that we call the sense of passing of time. And of course neuroscience, which is halfway between psychology and biochemistry, it's where things go together. I think is a science which is bubbling and is also confused, but it's we're learning so much, and I expect that answers will come from there. Perhaps more than what the neuroscientists expect.
Any more questions? Okay, we'll go to that gentleman there, then we'll come to that.
Good evening, sir. So, may I know what is the frontier work right now for the quantum gravity, and to what extent that the quantum gravity already agree with classic thermodynamic?
What is the last thing you said? To what extent is quantum gravity?
The quantum gravity agree with the thermodynamic, like the increasing entropy, all these.
Good. So right now there are a number of quantum gravity theories which are being studied at different level of development. And the discussion is open of which one works better. None is complete. And a lot of work, it's focusing on trying to connect to things we can measure in astrophysics, in cosmology, to test this theories. I've been working in loop quantum gravity, which is one of these theories, for many years. I'm trying to see if we can find empirical confirmations. Nature is talking, is telling us things. For instance, one hope was that at CERN, at LHC, supersymmetric particle would be found. That would have counted as a plus for string theory. It did not come out. So it counted as minus for string theory. It's not a proof of anything, but it makes one theory bit less credible than it was before. So we are in the middle of a situation in which we have theories, but we're looking for testing, and we don't know. In this, the bringing quantum gravity together with thermodynamics, it's an open problem, much discussed, on which there are many papers out, a lot of confusion. People say everything and the opposite of everything. We're really in the dark. In fact, there is already confusion on how to do the thermodynamics of classical general relativity. We understand thermodynamics of statistical mechanics of non-general relativistic systems well, but the thermodynamics of the classical gravitational field is still not clear. So these are open frontiers of current research. A lot of people work in quantum gravity. Very few people are working on the thermodynamics of classical and quantum relativity, but they're both open problems.
I think we have a final question just here.
Yes, thank you for this great moment. I was wondering what is the link you do between movement, events, and time, and
with movements,
movements, events,
Events, yeah.
Events and time, and when does the moment start, in fact?
It's the problem is that the word times means all sort of different things. Okay, so the common notion we have about time is very structured. So there is one sense of time, which is this sort of global variable that ticks the life of the universe. That's, if you want to do fundamental physics, you have to forget. Okay, but there's a much, much weaker sense of time, which is simply that things change locally, things happen, events happen, as you say, and change is always two variables changing one with respect to another one. If by time you only mean that, time is all over, because realities change. Reality is not to stay, is to change. It's not about being, it's about to happen. So if by time you mean just the counting of what happens locally, every time there is change, so there's movement in a sense, in a wide sense of movement, then immediately there is time, because it's a counting of it. This very, very general definition of time is also the oldest one, because it's the one is in Aristotle. Time as a numbering of change, and that, I think, there's nothing in physics that requires us to abandon this very large notion of time. But that's nothing to do with the time of Newtonian physics, of relativistic physics, with the time of the Schrödinger equation, the Newton equation, or the clock time. These are much more complicated concept of times, which are not true, which don't hold, don't work at the fundamental level, only come as approximations.
And that is, unfortunately, all we've got time for, at least for our conversation. I'm not going to get away with anything tonight, am I? I think probably after the discussion, and particularly after Carlo's reading, you shouldn't be in any doubt what an extraordinary book this is, both deeply moving, deeply profound, but also accessible. There should be no question that it's too complex or too scientific for anybody. It's really such a wonderful piece of work. Thankfully, we have stacks and stacks and stacks of them at the front, not only of The Order of Time, but also the 7 Brief Lessons on Physics and Reality is Not What It Seems, and even some copies of Carlo's biography of Anaximander, who we touched on briefly. So all of those are available at the front. I'm sure Carlo would be happy to sign them if you bring them up after you've paid for them, of course. Do stick around, have a glass of wine with us afterwards, continue the conversation, and please just give it up one more time for Professor Carlo Rovelli.
Thank you, Adam.